Welcome back. We had a strong GDP growth number, but the small worries about this growth number is that it perhaps is getting unequally distributed, evidenced by the fact that agriculture share is fallen just a growth of 1.8%, and consumption has not picked up, stands at just 4.4%. I've been speaking with Soumya Kanti Ghosh of State Bank, Professor Santosh Mehrotra of JNU, and Pranjul Bhandari of HSBC. Gentlemen, and Pranjul, thank you very much for your patience. Well, Professor Mehrotra, absence of data cannot mean that it must be unequal. The fact remains that the government is also giving 5 kilos of free grains to a very large number of people, and there are other, public goods like gas connections and water supply and electricity, which have increased in the last few years. Wouldn't that be ameliorating the inequality in some way?
It would be ameliorating poverty.
Okay.
It would not be ameliorating inequality, I'm sorry to say.
Okay.
And honestly, when I talk about 66 million enterprises, let's just remind ourselves that this is data from 2015-16, and this is NSS data. So it's about as rock solid as it can be. It is just tragic that the NSSO is not revealing the unorganized sector enterprises survey data. I go along with the sort of couple of points that Pranjul made, profits of MSMEs. The registered top-end MSMEs may well have gone up. Construction activity, I agree with her. It has been on the upswing during the recovery, and we know that construction jobs are growing, but they are not growing at anywhere close to the rate at which that would pull workers out of agriculture. Those are precisely the kinds of activities that would pull workers out of agriculture. We are not seeing evidence of that. The PLFS data is proving that. Thirdly, free food. Free food, why is the government being so generous? Partly it's being generous on account of the impending elections and the just December 3 election results. But let's just remember that the government realizes that joblessness is high, youth unemployment is extremely high. All the data points towards that. Non-farm jobs have not been growing, and all the so-called jobs that have grown have been mostly either own account workers who have moved in, because they've lost regular work. Okay. PLFS data is showing that they've lost regular work and they become own account workers, and they've become self-employed. And 50 million people have been added to the category of unpaid family labor. That means the little household that's in the urban areas is a vendor selling pakoras. Now the wife has joined hands. Okay. Or the woman in the family farm has joined the family farm. When you're talking about a workforce which is 570 million, yes, you want to look at 8% of 4.8% of the workforce which are taxpayers, and they are not all taxpayers, because most of these people who file returns are not actually taxpayers.
Right. That point is taken.
And then you say, okay, among those who are taxpayers, in other words, of the 4.8%, probably half are actual taxpayers, and within that it's improved. Yeah. Come on, you're not making a serious argument.
No, I agree with you that the percentage of tax filers tends to be 8%, but if you actually looked at the number of taxpayers, it's far less. It's a good 2 percentage points.
Less. One final point about the Udyam and the GST. Just one, very briefly. Of course, I'm perfectly aware of the Udyam registration, the GST registration. Who's registering under the GST and the Udyam? The largest ones among the so-called MSMEs. And I'm saying the vast majority are not even registered anyway. Okay. Then out of those who are registered, there are only 30% registered somewhere or the other. Of that, some small fraction have now come into the Udyam and GST. My good friend Soumya needs to recognize this. Yeah. Needs to recognize this.
No, I don't think the point is taken away that there is a large unorganized sector in India. But what I'm trying to get at is whether the last 2-3 years are seeing an accentuation. We cannot correct, a century-old inequality, but are we getting worse? Was my question.
It's gotten
Incrementally.
worse in the last 7 years, no question.
Okay. Well, Pranjul, any more anecdotal data? What we find is that staples companies are not showing very high volume growth, but a Titan, sees very high volume growth. Is there evidence in corporate sector to indicate that there may be higher inequality, or is this evidence not enough?
Yeah, look, there's just so much of data out there and anecdotal evidence, and it's very hard to sort of bring it all in like 5-10 minutes. But I'll just go back to the point I made on construction. The data that I'm seeing is that there is a lot of movement of rural Indians from farm to construction over the last year and a half. And we are actually also seeing it in the remittances data. You get good remittances data from urban to rural, and that has really spiked up. And I think that is providing somewhat of a cushion at a time when there is, this whole El Nino-led low production in rural India. So the role of construction should not be undermined. And I think at some point you also said that investment being so high means that, in a way it's supportive of K-shape for some reason. But to the extent investment leads to higher construction activity, I think that does create some of the jobs. You can argue about the quality of the jobs, but it does create some of the jobs. But taking a step back, if I very simply, divide India into old India and new India, the truth is that growth has been created in the last couple of years primarily by new India, which in my view makes up only 15% of India's GDP. It has all the things like high skill manufacturing, the whole services sector we've been talking about, GCCs, the digital public infrastructure, startups and all of that. They've been growing very well in the last 3 to 4 years, and they've been causing most of the growth. And with just them growing, we can continue to have some more growth, high growth for a longer period of time. But at the same time, 85% of GDP, which is old India, is not benefiting in the same way.
Yeah, Pranjul, I'm out of time. I'm sorry I have to cut you off. Soumya has to get the last word. Soumya, would you worry that, if you continue to have capital expansion, investment-led growth, and if consumption doesn't pick up, then even that capital expansion will not happen because there isn't enough consumption. Could we be leading to that kind of a situation?
Yeah, Latha, can I just take a second to just mention one point regarding the Uddam? I think I look into the Uddam portal and 99.94% of the Uddam registration are actually coming from the micro enterprises who are outside the banking system. So there are many data points which you can mention, but I'll not get into that in terms of the unpaid workers also. But to the larger points of your investment boom, I think the construction activity, one important point we need to understand is that investment in construction activity was used to be quite employment intensive some time back, maybe a decade back. Now I don't know how much employment intensive it could be, because nowadays a lot of these things are become institutionalized and
that's right. I was going to say that. A lot of the bridge building is not that labor intensive.
Exactly.
Perhaps it's only house construction that is labor intensive.
So I think that at the end of the way, the investment is fine, but and to the larger point of consumption, the growth, we all know that it was at 4.4% last quarter. But I think over a point of time, the consumption growth is going to broad base, because we are already seeing in terms of the rural economy. I don't have time to discuss that, but the credit growth to the agricultural sector this year has been very good. And the most defining characteristics, if you know, which we actually are seeing in our bank also, a large number of farmers are now selling their crops on the Enam platform and getting DBT transfers directly. So
well, I'm sorry. We will have to end on that note. We are completely out of time and in fact over time. But the point is taken that we don't have adequate data to measure, what has been the trickle down of growth. And I think besides the lack of data, there is a lack of time as well. Well argued. Thank you very much, Soumya, Professor Mehrotra, and Pranjul Bhandari. We have to wind up on this edition of Indianomics. Thanks much for watching.
A decade